But I hope whatever you do, you're going to do it with the Lord. This next song is about going with Jesus. Why don't you stand with us? Anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. And anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. Anywhere He leads me in this world below. Anywhere without Him, dearest joys would fade. Anywhere with Jesus, I am not afraid. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus, I am not alone. Other friends may fail me, He is still my own. Though His hand may lead me over dreary ways, anywhere with Jesus is a house of praise. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus over land and sea, telling souls in darkness of salvation free. Ready as He summons me to go or stay. Anywhere with Jesus when He points the way. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. On the last, anywhere with Jesus I can go to sleep. When the darkness shadows round about me creep, knowing I shall waken never more to roam. Anywhere with Jesus will be home, sweet home. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils His lovely face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath, His covenant, His blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. On the last, when He shall come with trumpet sound, oh may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Amen. Let's open in a word of prayer tonight. Dad, will you lead us in prayer this evening? Thank you.
Father God, we come before you. Thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you tonight to be here to hear your word, to fellowship one with another. We pray you use the word just to, Lord, just to challenge our hearts to better ourselves for you, to be holy as you are holy. Lord God, we thank you for your mercy and grace that covers all that area that we come short in. And we thank you for your mercy. We ask and pray you just bless the service now in Jesus' name.
step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became poor. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Amen. We have one last song, Oh the Heavens. As your children gather in peace, all the angels sing in heaven. In your temple, all that I see is to glimpse your holy presence. All the heavens cannot hold you, Lord, how much less to dwell in me. I can only make my one desire, holding on to thee. All the angels exalt you on high. What a kingdom to depart. But you left your throne in the sky, just to live inside my heart. All the heavens cannot hold you, Lord, how much less to dwell in me. I can only make my one desire, holding on to thee. All the heavens cannot hold you, Lord, how much less to dwell in me. I can only make my one desire, holding on to thee. I will always good to lift our voices up to the Lord. Once again, we'll dismiss our teens this Sunday night. We'll grab our Bibles and turn to Judges chapter number 7 as you find your seats. All right, well, welcome this evening. Let's get started. Judges chapter number 7. We've seen Gideon's doubt, and we've seen Gideon's fears, and now we're going to see Gideon's victory. And what I'd like to do at this time, as we open up Judges chapter number 7, I'd really like to almost editorialize the story of Gideon here, as opposed to a full-on sermon. If you turn to Judges chapter 7, there are a couple things that I'd like you to do while we read the story of Gideon. I think it's safe to say I've seen some of these challenges. I've seen this happen in churches and situations in families, and I believe the devil kind of gets into our lives when God is trying to bring a great victory. And what I'd like you to do is first consider what Gideon endured to have victory in God, and then consider the challenges that he faced from the people around him. And I think this is important because all of us, I think, at one time or another have been one of these people, and we want to avoid some behavioral challenges that we're going to see in the children of Israel, and then we'll close out our story and our study of Gideon. So if you'd like to begin in verse number 16, we're going to begin where we left off last week. Now, last week we talked about the things that make people tick. And one of the things, again, about the story of Gideon that always shocks me is what convinced him that he could win a great battle. And we talked about that last week. You never know what God is going to say that's going to touch someone. And that's exactly what we see here in Gideon's life situation. He happened to hear of a dream in a pagan camp, and his name was mentioned, and that was all that he needed. So now he's going to go forth in victory, and a couple things are going to happen that shock me. And of course, throughout the story, you're going to see that even though God is using Gideon, the children of Israel, everybody's still doing that which is right in their own eyes. You're going to see really quickly why they fall into idolatry. You're going to see really quickly why they're totally unsuccessful, right, as a nation, when you watch what Gideon has to do and what God has to do through Gideon to bring them victory. Look at verse number 16. And he divided 300 men into 3 companies. Now, I bet Gideon never thought he would do that. But here he has only 300 guys against what we know is a minimum of 135,000 people. So 120,000 people will die on this side of the Jordan, and 15,000 people with 2 kings will escape to the other side of the Jordan. So we know we got a minimum of 135,000 people that he's about to fight. He's got 300 guys. And what do you do when you only have 300 people? You divide them into 3 groups. So I guess that's what every great battle looks like. You got to spread your men out, and so he does, and he divides them across into 3 companies. He put a trumpet in every man's hand, because that's what all the great warriors have had, right? Trumpets. Typically, the guy with a trumpet is not going to do the fighting, right? I mean, we in our own country and culture, we've had drummer boys and buglers. Those guys are usually not the great warriors, right? But they, here in the story, every single man has a trumpet with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said to them, "Look on me and do likewise." And behold, so they're all watching Gideon. I don't know how they could tell. They're all standing across, the hill here. You know that they're typically, in the Bible, you'll see a battle. There'll be a mountain on one side, a mountain on the other, and the battle will be fought in the valley, and we have a similar situation here. And so they're all watching Gideon, and he says, when I blow the trumpet, I and all that are with me, that's 100. How'd you like to be 300 guys? Gideon's the one God called, and you get to be in one of the other groups, right? So now you're like, okay, well, Gideon's over on the other side of the mountain. I wish I was hanging out with him, because obviously God's going to use him. And here they are. They're all just watching Gideon blow the trumpets, also on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And so Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came to the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets, and they broke the pitchers that were in their hands. I'm not sure what the goal there was, but maybe the crashing, all the breaking of pitchers sounded like an army. Man, I bet the Midianites were really discouraged when they found out how many guys were after them, right? How would you like to wake up from that battle and find out that like literally 300 guys just beat you in battle? But the Lord was with them, and we learned that it is nothing to the Lord to save by many or by few. And so they broke the pitcher, they blew the trumpets, and they held the lamps in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. So these guys they're doing it all, man. They're making the noises. You ever see one of those bands where there's like two people and one's playing the harmonica and a guitar and beating a drum with his foot, and the other one they're trying to just two people, and they're making a whole range of sound. That's what's happening right here. Just 300 guys doing the work of a whole army. They got a trumpet in one hand, and it says here they stood every man. And again, this is very important. They stood every man in his place around the camp. So there was actually no initial attack. And this is one of those things. God is going to fight the battle, right? They stood every man in his place around the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. That's precisely what you should not do, right? But that's what they did. And obviously we know the Lord is behind all of this, right? The dreams that those soldiers have been dreaming are about Gideon. They knew that they were going to lose. And isn't that funny? Isn't it funny that God's calling his people to victory, and Gideon's going like, no, God, you can't do it, right? You can't do it. And then here's a pagan in a camp of 120,000 people, and they're like, oh, man, we're totally dead, right? And you just kind of get this sense that it seems that the world is always revering God more than us, right? And so these guys are terrified. Oh, man, that Los's going to come in the camp and break down all of our tents. And Gideon's up there like, we can't do this. We cannot do this. It's never going to work, right? But God is working in the hearts of the wicked, right? He placed fear in their hearts at this time. It's obvious. And these three companies, they blow the trumpet. Everybody runs, they cry, and they flee. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Beth Shittah and Zerath, and to the border of Abel Meholah. None of these places we know, and to Tabbath, but we know that they were running, okay? Now, this is another thing about the victory I really like. As soon as this trumpet is blown and all this mayhem is happening, and they're not fighting, right? They're just watching this host kill each other, which is actually, if you read anything about the history of the Ishmaelites, that's not that strange, right? They have a tendency to fight. Ishmael's a wild man. Every man's hand will be against him, and his hand will be against every man. That is true in the Bible, okay? And that is exactly what we are seeing happening right now, right? There's this battle, and they're just standing there, right? And it says they're blowing the trumpets, and here, now remember, we had 32,000 people join Gideon. They were ready to go, and 22,000 were like, hey, if I don't have to be here, I am gone, right? Like glory, victory, war, that was not in their interest. They were gone. The other people got sent home that didn't want to go, but they were sent home. But as soon as these people start to run, it says that the men of Israel, we're assuming the same guys that went home afraid, they gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and Asher and out of Manasseh, and they pursued after the Midianites. Anybody know anything interesting about this time and this place? In typical Bible stories, Judah and Benjamin are the most prominent tribes, right? They have been before. They will be again. And yet, no mention of them all through the story of Barak and the story of Gideon. These guys are just totally mute. I don't know if they were warring among themselves, or if they were defeated and they just hadn't risen, or if they were living in kind of comfort while their brothers are being invaded. We're not really sure exactly what's going on, but again, this is kind of the story of the central tribes, and really almost everything you will hear about Naphtali, because
You won't hear about them again in Issachar. I mean, it's all right here in Judges. Pretty much the whole rest of the Bible. You're like, who are those tribes again? Who is Zebulun? I mean, is that a tribe? I don't even know. Where did that guy come from? But they're really prominent in this part of the Bible, and pretty much only in this part of the Bible, even though we'll hear about Ephraim again. And so they gathered themselves out of Asher and Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites, and Gideon sent messengers throughout all of Mount Ephraim. Now, these guys have been mute too. Not a word of them since the last judge, right? Since 2 judges ago. And they came down. He sent messengers, come down against the Midianites and take before them the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. So they are recognizing the Midianites are trying to flee across the river. And so he sends messengers or runners ahead to cut them off. This is really wild. Just imagine this. Here's Gideon and 300 guys, right, chasing near 120,000 people, okay? I just wonder, I was thinking to myself, would it be strange to like turn around and see like 300 guys and ask yourself, why are we running again? I'm still trying to figure out, why are we running? But of course, we do know that now the host is starting to gather, right? People are coming out of their tents, all the cowards or those that were afraid. I mean, praise the Lord, God has grace. He lets them back into this battle, right, to have victory. And so he calls on the Ephraimites to go ahead and to cut them off at the river Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together. I mean, I don't know where they've been this whole time. It's like they've been sleeping, right? They had no interest in being a part of this battle. Gideon blew that trumpet, and did the Ephraimites come? Well, they never showed up. They weren't interested in this battle, right? But now they're all here. Now we're ready to fight, right? The battle is won, and they're coming out of the woodwork. And that's one of those parts of this story I think everybody needs to learn. When you start having victory in your life, you're gonna find out that all these kind of people will be around. Or when a church is doing work, when God's doing work, when you're having a victorious situation where everybody will leave you when it's hard, right? And then when you get going, everybody want to come back and show up and jump in on the bandwagon and experience the excitement, right? And remember that. We'll talk about it in a moment. And they took the 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb. And they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of Jordan. Chapter 8. I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have read that part. Some of the ladies were going to leave us. But the kids, look, the young boys, they're like, man, they got their heads. Now see, now we got your attention. And I used to listen to that. I would be sleeping the entire time. My dad would talk about some guy chopping off somebody's head, and I was awake at church all of a sudden, like, what? Is that in the Bible? Somebody, I'm going to read that. I don't know where that came from. So all of a sudden, I was interested in God. I remember you would never send your kid. First year I counseled camp, right? I really wanted to get the boys' attention, right? I'd never been a camp counselor, and I probably should never be a camp counselor, but I was excited about teaching these kids, and they did not. It was a bunch of hoodlums. They didn't want to listen to anything. So I said, we're supposed to have a Bible study. We got to study the Bible and get these kids interested in the Bible. You know what I did? I opened up to the story of Jael, the lady that nailed that guy's head to the floor. I mean, those kids were like riveted. I'm like, whoa, is that in the Bible? Man, I think probably Pastor Howard got a lot of really bad mail. Like the next week, either the kids were, just like I said, there were no, snitches get stitches. Maybe they were just keeping it to themselves, or else there were some angry parents. And I never heard about it. They didn't pay me anyway, so it wasn't a big loss. It wasn't that bad, but I used to tell these stories, man. The Bible has some really rough stuff. Remember, the Bible is often description and not prescription, right? So they're describing what happened, not prescribing. And obviously, the men of Ephraim here, not great guys. Verse number 1, amidst the great battle, God's doing a work, delivering them from hiding in their little holes in the mountains, right? So, I mean, I bet they are pumped. They got called to this battle that was already won. They got to do these victorious things. 8:1. And the men of Ephraim said to him, why have you served us thus, that you did not call us? Which is wild, because Gideon blew the trumpet and everybody around just showed up. But apparently the Ephraimites needed a special invitation, okay? And you called us not, and when you went to fight the Midianites, and they did chide with him sharply. Now, if they knew anything about the battle, they know that God wouldn't use them, because he couldn't use them because they did not trust in the Lord. And they would use it against God. And now we have, again, in the middle of a battle, I got some men with a bad attitude right now. Some heads are going to roll, right? I'll show you. You got Oreb and Zeeb's head. I might take a couple of years. I mean, you would think an angry response at this time would be reasonable. And Gideon says, what have I done now in comparison to you? Well, I don't know. Listen to God, beat 120,000 people with 300 people. But humble response, what have I done? It is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? And God delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb. And what was I able to do in comparison to you? That is a humble response, isn't it? I mean, he gave them the glory. He wasn't, and this is so important. Isn't it incredible? And we've heard this before. It's incredible what can get done if we don't care who gets the credit. And this is a perfect story for that reality. It's incredible what Gideon accomplished, but I would say that would be totally impossible if he was micromanaging, making sure he got the credit. Not of interest to him. So here we are in the middle of a battle. Gideon and 300 men are chasing, right now at a minimum, 15,000 people still. They're chasing them, okay? And the men of Ephraim, like, this is a good time. Let's have an argument about who has disrespected who. It fascinates me, actually. I believe the devil is so good at this because you will find that whenever God's trying to do something, okay, the devil will try to sow discord, right? In your family, in your church, in your workplace. I'm telling you right now, as soon as God does something, you will turn around, you go like, are we seriously doing this right now in the middle of this exciting time? Are we really going to have this argument? But that's exactly what happens. This is how Satan works. And he has this humble response, and of course, their anger was abated toward him. Well, thank goodness they're not mad anymore, right? And so they joined Gideon, and he passed over with 300,000 men. Is that what it says? So Gideon passes over, he and 300 men that were with him. This is such a wild story. So people are coming out of the rocks, tens of thousands of guys coming out of the mountains. Everybody wants the credit. Who wants to cross the river? Same 300 guys, right? Same 300 people. As far as I mean, maybe there's other guys, but it says here that he passed over and 300 people that were with him. Isn't it incredible? You have this giant victory. God has done this incredible work. And now and thousands of people have seen it, and they're all getting involved, but who's still leading the charge? The same people that were faithful to God in the beginning, that were not afraid to go away, that answered the call of God, that God chose to do the work. It's just them. Faint and yet pursuing. How frustrating is that? I mean, here's Gideon's guys are exhausted, and the Ephraimites just showed up. They're all fresh. Are they running? No, they're not running the battle. But Gideon, and I think actually right now is when a lot of people will stop. Having victory in God, did most of the work, and quit, right? First sign of conflict, first spiritual challenge. We're having some victory. Oh, there's something's not right. I'm tired. Let's go home. But that's not what Gideon does. He recognizes the need, right, to continue on. So he passes over, faint and yet pursuing. I heard a whole sermon on that, and it's great. I mean, it's a great example to us. Some of the most inspiring words of the Bible. Tired, but still working for the Lord. And he said to the men of Succoth, that is on the other side of the river, give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me. There's only 300 of them. And I am pursuing essentially after the kings of Midian. The princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thy hand, that we should give bread to your army? So in other words, we're not helping you until you win. Right? Not only Succoth, but he goes to the next town. Can you believe this? He's in Israel. They had a great victory, and the people in Israel are still refusing even to aid Israel in this conflict. Isn't that, it's so fascinating, and we're seeing here, God is doing a great work, but the people of Israel are still slaves in their own minds, aren't they? And we know the host is dead. I mean, that's the end. The Midianites, as far as we could tell, will never raise an army like this against Israel again. Okay? I mean, this is going to be the end of their reign of terror forever, as far as we could tell. And yet, they're gone. Most of them are dead. There's the last few fleeing. And nobody will help Gideon because they are not, the victory has already happened, right? But they have not recognized it. They have their demands. I will only join. I'll only be a part of this victory if. And so Gideon tells the prince of Succoth that when he gets back, I'm going to tear your flesh with the thorns of wilderness and with briars. And that sounds kind of harsh, but, again, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. In our country, the penalty for treason is death, so maybe this is pretty nice, if you could look at it that way. And Gideon, he goes on to Penuel, and he said, they don't help him. He says, when I come back in peace, I will break down this tower. Those are pretty big words for 300 people pursuing 15,000. Expected not only to get the victory from God, but to have the energy on the way back to take care of the traitors in his own country. Verse number 10, now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor and their hosts with them, about 15,000 men. So 300 pursuing 15,000. And all that were left of the host of the children of the east, for there fell 120,000 men that drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of them that dwelt in the tents in the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and smote the host, for the host was secure. So because they felt like they were okay, they lost. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them. And again, you kind of notice like the relentless nature of Gideon. Is anybody watching this? He's just like not going to stop until this is all done, until he's taking care of all these guys. He's not letting these kings escape. And he discomfited all the host, and Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle before the sun was up, and he caught a young man of Succoth. Watch this. So he kills the 15,000. He takes the kings captive, and of course we don't know how many of those ran still. Probably some did run. The Bible doesn't say everyone was dead. But they run. He captures these kings, and it says now remember, he was tired before he crossed over the Jordan. So now he's gone all this time. He's fought this fight, and he said, before the sun was even up, he returned from the battle, and he caught a young man of Succoth and inquired of him, and he described the princes of Succoth and the elders thereof as, again, it seems to me, about 77 men. And he came to these men, and it says in verse 16 that with the thorns and briars he taught them. That's the word they use. Pretty hardcore, right? Again, I like that he was kind of choosing who he punished, specifically the elders. He knew that order was coming down from the height, so he was kind of just in that respect. He beat down the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. And then he put Zebah and Zalmunna on trial. Some of us know the story. He asked them, because they apparently in Tabor long ago, these men had killed his family. And so he tries them, they admit to the crime, and then he kills them. This is the end of the story, the victory of Gideon. Now, on the hills of victory, there's often some really big decisions are made, and we're going to see Gideon's victory and then his failures in a moment. But since we're on the topic of what Gideon did in the battle, let's approach a couple of things I think are very important whenever we do anything for God. Number one, and two things we've got to realize. Number one, if you're pursuing victory in your life, you will meet these people. And secondly, we need to consider if somebody else is pursuing victory in their life, we should not be these people, right? These are behaviors to avoid. Number one, notice that there are those who are afraid to help until victory is likely. There are those who are afraid to help until victory is likely. These people will go home if you let them, right? They are not interested in moving forward for God on their own. They must be led. They have to follow. And so we see very clearly right away, these are not the worst people in the world. They're not traitors, right? They are not prideful as far as we know. They're afraid. And so the first group of people that Gideon has to confront in order to unite his nation and win the victory of the Lord, he has to get over the fact that him and these 300 guys, they're going to do it, and the other guys are not joining until the victory is already won. I'm just going to give you an idea. I do not think that the average group of these people out of Naphtali were coming because they wanted to fight God's enemies. I believe they're all showing up, and I'll give you a good reason, because all the gold and the spoils from war are there. If 120,000 people fall, looters, how many years of livings do you think these guys have? So these people, they're going to come out for the victory. They're going to come out to collect the spoils, right? They are ready and waiting to be a part of this end victory. Now, I don't hate these guys. It's very natural, I think, especially when you're new to Christ, when you're new to any kind of situations, to be afraid. And these people were governed by fear, and therefore they shared in the victory, I think, on a very superficial level. They enjoyed the excitement. I'll tell you, you build a church, you do a work, there are those that will not join you until they're pretty sure you're going to win, okay? And that is something we want to avoid, right? Believers, again, we look in the Old Testament, we see like one person that is in contact with God, and everybody is pretty untethered, right, and pretty ungodly without the Lord. If you're saved today, you have the Lord Jesus Christ, right? God can speak to you. We should be people of victory. But often people are afraid to make the hard choices. They're afraid to take the serious steps. They will not begin the battle unless they know that victory is certain. And most of the time until victory is already won. And that's important, because whenever you move forward for God, you're going to go like, isn't everybody in my family going to get on board? No, probably not. A lot of them are going to show up as soon as it gets really good, right? Wait till you start handing out the benefits of a godly life. Well, now we're going to go, right? They're not showing up at the beginning. Of course, I don't want to say like nobody did. Some of them did come, but they were afraid, so they left. So we got to love them, and you got to appreciate the grace of God here, right? God, everybody's sharing in the victory that was bought by the hand of a few faithful men. Number two, there are those who are indifferent to the work until they are called. Notice the men of Ephraim. Gideon blew the trumpet by the Spirit of God. Ephraim didn't show up for a general call, right? These men are, they are apparently, these are the sons of Joshua, right? These are a noble people. Already 2 judges have come before. Why should we go and help Naphtali? Why should we follow? Who is this Gideon, right? They did not come until the victory was certain, but especially until they were particularly called. These people came specifically for personal glory, right? And you learn, right? And again, these are the ones that come into they're going to start a fight in the middle. And I can't tell how many times somebody's like, they got sin in their life, they want to get better, they're going to follow God, they're going to put this stuff out of their life, and as soon as they try, the people just show up and trying to discourage them. You're like, what are you doing? Christians helping them do sin. Like, don't justify that to her. Don't justify that to him. They're trying to get better. They're trying to have a victory in their life for God. These individuals, again, are generally indifferent, right, until there's victory, and then they're angry because they, right, are not getting the glory. And so the men of Ephraim come down after, they didn't show up when he blew the trumpet, so he's got to send them a personalized, handwritten letter, right, to get them out. And then they'll show up. But when they show up, they're like, oh man, we got a problem. We did not get a personal invitation when this started, right? You're like, what? Are you kidding me? 120, all the bad guys. Israel's living in a impoverished state. They cannot grow food. They cannot have animals. They just get ransacked. It's been years of being ransacked. And now God's given them victory, and this is what we're going to fight about? And this just shows, again, I think it's very important, because I will say that we are not above this. There is no end to the kind of pettiness that good people, righteous people, and Christian people will fight about in times of great victory. And I say as Christians, we need to really be careful about this. God, man, I tell you, God does great works, and I've seen it over and over and over. And people are just fixated on the silliest little things. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, we'll give $20,000 to missions, and like the next day, somebody will be mad about something like like which direction the chair was turned. And I'm like, were you even in church? Were you there? What is going on right now, right? Like, this is a great victory. This is not we don't want to stop what God is doing to get in the way. And of course, we wouldn't want to say that. You never raise a question in victorious times. If there's sin and there's problems, real problems, it's fine to address that, but be careful about pettiness, right? Here we have these men. Gideon is 300 guys. They're pursuing an army. And these guys are like, let's have an argument about who has been disenfranchised, right? And you got us here, Gideon, like the guy's going, what are we even doing here? They want to cause a fight in the middle of a victory. You know, great men of the Bible knew that there was a time for everything. There was a time for everything. You know, David's in the middle of a big celebration, and some guy's throwing rocks, right, and cursing him. And the guy next to him says, Abishai, who we love, he always wants to kill somebody, right? He said, you let me go, and I will lift that guy's head off of his body, right? And David said, this is not the time, right? We have a great victory. We're not going to deal with infighting on this. Nobody's going to die on this victorious day. Now, that guy got his eventually, okay? But during that time, David recognized we're in the middle of God doing something great. This is a time of joy and celebration. We're not doing this right now. We're not doing this right now. This is really important, too, I think, in your family, too, to know when is the right time to address issues. Is God working in us? We're having victory in our lives. We'll deal with the petty things later, right? It's not like we never deal with these. It's not like the idea that the Ephraimites hadn't been called or maybe weren't being honored, maybe hadn't shown up, shouldn't be dealt with, right? But are we really doing this right now? We're all tired. I haven't eaten. You haven't eaten. We haven't slept in 3 days. We're chasing this giant host. God is about to do something great, and we're going to argue about this right now? I don't have time for this, right? Again, don't be that person. Don't be the person who wants a fight in the middle of God's great work. And this is something I have seen here so many times in my life. You watch people go, you know what? There's a lot going on. There's some things I don't like. Maybe some things that aren't good going on. Maybe I do not agree with everything. But we're doing something for God, right? So let's set it aside. And so I think it's an incredible testament. Look at, and what you have to take, there's the bad, right? And then there's the good. Look at Gideon. So humble. And this is a great testament to who he was. Hey, look at how awesome you guys are. I mean, I tell you, those were not the first words that came out of my mouth, okay? I would have had some righteous indignation right about them, not Gideon. And you figure, have you ever noticed that when you're super tired, right? Or when you have a really stressful situation, you are prone to say foolish things, right? You're prone to say, I'll do really good until I'm tired or hungry, yeah, or both. Man, you don't know what's coming out, right? We get angry. You're like, have you ever said anything? You'd be like, did I just say that? I'm so sorry. I need some sleep. Can we talk about this tomorrow? I mean, we had these kind of conversations in our family. Have you had them in yours? But Gideon did not. Again, that gracious reaction is incredible. He says to them, look, what have I even done compared to you? And the answer to that is obviously everything. He did everything. They did nothing, but he gave them the glory. Well, wasn't he worried about afterwards? What if they got the glory and then they turn out to be the leaders of Israel? He wasn't worried about that right now. Gideon is following God's call, right? He is vanquishing God's enemies. And again, we're not, Christians, our sword is the word of God. Our enemies are not flesh and blood. They're Satan and his works in the world, right? And the sin and what it's doing to the people around us. But here's Gideon, again, great example of this incredible work. Look at Ecclesiastes 4:4. Ecclesiastes 4:4. And I love this passage because people can be so spiteful, right, in the middle of great trials. And this is not just an Old Testament thing. Anybody heard of John Wesley? The founder of the Methodist movement, right? His brother Charles, one of the greatest hymn writers of all time. Again, you could credit John Wesley and, oh man, I don't know why the other preacher just got out of my mind, but we'll deal with him later. Anyways, just a couple of preachers to the early days really changing, right? the culture. But you know, he was married to a woman who was totally against his ministry. She was constantly accusing him of infidelity, abusing him. One man testified to coming to John Wesley's house, and when he went into the house, she was dragging John Wesley across the floor by his hair. This is how bad. So he married her, and apparently she was really against the ministry. We think maybe she had some mental issues, just jealous. She would find dirt on him, dig it up, and send it to his enemies. Just total mess. Finally, she left him. I mean, he had a terrible marriage. Okay, petty, vindictive, trying to destroy his ministry. And you just gotta. He founded the Methodist movement, right? I mean, some of the great works, the greatest works we've ever seen in the way of hymns came out of this family. And what was she doing that whole time, right? She's fighting over just silly stuff. And I know that there's no marriage is perfect and it's really challenging. And I certainly want to be living in that kind of a glass house, right? But here he is. It's happened, right? It's happened in real life in our days. Ecclesiastes 4:4. He says again, this is Solomon lamenting the state of the world. He says, again, I considered all travail and every right work, and that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. And I cannot help but believe that when Solomon said this, he was thinking of Gideon, right? He says, every time somebody's trying to do this right, trying to do what's right, right? Every time somebody's travailing and working towards something great, there's got to be someone that is envious that wants to destroy that. And he says, this is vanity and vexation of spirit. What he's saying basically, as he laments the state of the earth as it is and the reality of the world, that is that when we, and any one of us tries to move forward for Jesus Christ, tries to do what's right, envy will turn even the closest, of our friends and neighbors and the people in our politics in the world will be against us because of envy. And we need to protect ourselves against that, right? Against envy. James 4, 5, and 6 says, do you think that the Scripture says in vain that the Spirit that dwells in us lusteth to envy? But he giveth more grace, wherefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And this again, the pride of the men of Ephraim is so apparent. Their envy of the greatness of Gideon and his victory. We can't just be happy that God is working. He's not working in me. We have a problem, right? And that is, we got to watch out. Those that are willing to make a fight in the middle of a great victory. And lastly, there are those who will side with our enemies and will not help until victory is absolutely secured. Galatians 5:15 says, if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed of one another. And we learn something very real in this situation. Israel is not just being conquered by Midian, right? They are being destroyed from within. Even to the point that while they are winning the victory, men will not help, even with the piece of bread. He didn't ask them to fight, right? He didn't ask them to take up arms or sign a treaty. All he's asking for is bread, okay? Now, this can be a dangerous thing. Just consider David. And the priests that gave him bread, Saul killed them all, right? So they did have a choice to make. Are we going to follow the man who's God's leading, right? Or are we going to follow the world, right? And our enemies. And they chose, again, rather than giving bread to their friends, to fear their enemies. Job 6:14 says, to him that is afflicted, pity should be showed from his friend. I mean, who knows better than Job, right? Here he's in the middle of this devastating time, and what his 3 friends come, and what do? They spend their whole time ripping him apart. And you would think the people are supposed to be with you or against you. This is an incredible story of the victory, and I want to say that what you have to love about this story is Gideon faced obstacles that were both political and personal. He faced his own doubt and fears. He faced the end of his own strength. He faced treason from his enemies. He faced obstacles with people that were supposed to be on his side, wanting to fight in the middle of victory. But he persevered all the way until he had destroyed the last king of Midian. And that is a testimony to his commitment to the call of God on his life. That's an incredible thing. We need, of course, beware. Don't be discouraged. You press out for God. You do what's right. People will be envious. People will be afraid, right? The people that are named as Christians will be against you. I think it's important, once again, that we see the bigger picture. What has God called us to, and what are we trying to provide? And that's essentially what Gideon recognized. He got 40 years of peace from one day of faithfulness. And I've thought about that for many, in my life, I thought a lot about this. I wonder how many of us, just one really, really committed day to God, what would that do? What would one really committed year to the Lord, what could that do to a whole lifetime? Our children, our family, our bouts against sin. I mean, he won this all in what seems to be a 48-hour period. I want to just talk about one more thing, though. Gideon did win the victory, but Satan sowed the seeds of idolatry in this time. I want you to look at a couple things that happen at the end of this story. Look at Gideon's victory. I know, again, he's won. The bad guys are all gone and dead. Israel is free. Israel is, once again, is self-governed. How many of you remember when the Israelites told Samuel, give us a king, right? That's not the first time, actually. You want to see the first time the Israelites ever said, give us a king? It was to Gideon. They wanted to establish a dynasty. Verse 22 of chapter number 8. 22:8 here. He says, the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both thou and thy son, and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. Again, we've talked about this before. People were looking to individuals to get them godliness by proxy. Their own personal lives are still a mess. They're still prone to idolatry. They're still not confident in the Lord. They're still afraid to follow God, right? This is all, God still cannot work with these people. And when Gideon wins the battle, they said, we want you to create a dynasty. We want you and your children to become king. And look at Gideon's answer. I believe actually this sets the tone for Samuel's anger at the children of Israel when they tried to choose a king, because they already had a history they knew what it meant to choose a king. Look at verse number 23. And it says, and Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. What's the words here? The Lord shall rule over you. So when they asked for a king, it wasn't like some innocent thing like, oh, everybody else is a king. Why don't we have a king? It was already clearly defined in their culture that God was supposed to be their king. And even Gideon, now remember, let's just take a moment. Gideon knows so little about God that when a prophet comes rolling into town, he says, where are all these miracles that God supposedly did with Moses? So he's not like he's like the most holy person that ever lived. But even he knew that to ask for a dynasty, to set up a king, would have been to dethrone God in Israel. He says, I can't rule. By the way, he does judge Israel, but he does not rule Israel. In other words, he does become a judge, a keeper of the peace. He does discern the law according to God's laws, but he does not become a king, an absolute power, because he recognized that for them to set up a king was for them to dethrone God. That is all, and I can't even believe how many right decisions Gideon makes. I mean, can we just be in awe for one moment at how some idol worshiper's son that was, threshing some wheat, hiding out beside a winepress, is now making these insightful, right, discerning answers. I mean, he's essentially like you have to say, God did something in Gideon, didn't he? I mean, we can only attribute this to the Lord, to the Spirit of God giving him the words, but he makes one decision that I think we have to see, that's going to plague him, and maybe more than one. It says, but in verse number 24, but Gideon said to them, I would desire one request of you, that you would give every man the earrings of his prey, for they had golden earrings because they were, and I said this earlier, Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread every man his garment and did cast therein. They spread a garment and they did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, beside the ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about their camels' necks. And Gideon, and I don't really understand this actually. I don't know if I'll ever understand it, but you have to be from a really idolatrous nation probably to grasp this. And Gideon made an ephod out of that gold, and he put it in his city, even in Ophrah. Anybody know what an ephod is? That's right, a priestly garment. There are a couple actual interpretations of this. We know there was a linen ephod, which again was a priestly garment, which could have been sewn in gold, and we've seen that purple, white. Okay, there was also, the ephod was also a reference to the shoulder plate. You guys know the golden plate with the 12 stones, the names of Israel, the Urim and the Thummim, was stored there that they would cast, they would flip the coin basically before the Lord. There were smooth-sided stone and a rough-sided stone, and that's how they would decide what God's answer was. They would pray and then roll the stones, right, and then they would get an answer. That was in the ephod, this golden deal that he wore. It's like a shoulder piece, right? But also the word ephod seems to indicate possibly maybe a garment, maybe even an image. I'm not sure exactly what happens. But we know this, Gideon was not a Levite, right? But every man's doing that which is right in his own eyes. And he does all these things right, but he does one thing wrong. He takes all this gold that he gets. He doesn't buy a farm, implements, all this kind of, he doesn't do any of that, right? He melts it down and he makes an ephod, which was, again, what do we know about ephods? They're related to worship. And now this becomes a snare, and it says, he put it in his city, and Israel went thither. And again, they were committed fornication, which is that term, adultery in the Bible can also mean spiritual adultery, unfaithfulness to God, to Gideon and to his house. So now, again, all of Israel now comes to this ephod to try to worship it. And not only is it a snare to Gideon, but also to his house. And these seeds of idolatry that he's sown in his life, all the victories he had, right, are going to plague him and his children and the children of Israel for generations. Because again, even though one person is done right and has a moment of clarity, we don't have the kind of faithful, law-abiding, God-surrendered living in the culture that keep going back, right, to idolatry. And he subdued Midian from the children of Israel so that they lifted up their head no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. And Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, that was Gideon's name, went and dwelled in his own house. And Gideon had, we have another problem here, because even though he said, I'm not going to be a king, he sounds a lot like one, doesn't he? He had 70 sons of his own body begotten, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son whose name was Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash's father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass that as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again. They went again in adultery or fornication, spiritual fornication, after idolatry, after Balaam, and they made Baal Berith their god, which again, this is wild. This is a god of Shechem, okay? Just so we're clear. Remember how Solomon's wives took him off of the path? Who was the concubine of Gideon, it says here? His concubine that was in Shechem bare him a son, and his name was Abimelech. And guess what kind of idolatry they followed? Gideon started them on the wrong path, and they ended up following a god, Baal. By the way, I told you this, Balaam is not one god, it's many gods, right? So Baal Berith is a specific Canaanite god that was from Shechem. So his concubine's religion, right, now becomes the national religion. And it says Israel did not remember the Lord their God, and it says that they did not do kindness to Gideon. Verse number 35, neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he showed to Israel. And the final thing to say, I think, about this story is that it's also very important to recognize that though you may have victory, people may not appreciate you ultimately. And with that, we'll go to the Lord in prayer. Just encourage you all this week to be thinking about the Harvest Festival. If you have any games, we're going to have a meeting next week. We'll just take a few moments after Sunday service. If you've got some ideas, if you want to volunteer, we'll have an opportunity to do that. That'll be after Sunday morning this coming week, and it's going to be on the 29th. That's right after church. We're going to kind of do some last-minute setup. If you need to go home, you'll be able to come back. We made it at 1 so that people from other churches can come, but that doesn't mean we won't kind of start at 11 ourselves, okay? And with that, we'll go to a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the example of Gideon. We do have these stories for our examples. There's so much we can learn about identifying who we are and what our behavior is when God's doing great things. We do not want to squelch great victory. Also, Lord, for those of us, Lord, that are living in victorious moments, I pray that we'll remember to be very careful how you're working on our lives, that we keep you as our God in the forefront of our minds and our hearts. And we thank you for, as flawed as he was, we thank you for Gideon's faith to follow you in that great day of victory. I just ask, Lord, that you would sow that kind of faith in our lives, that this would be inspiring, that we who are faint would be yet pursuing and look forward to the victory that we can have in Jesus Christ. And we ask all these things in the name of your Son. Amen. All right, Lord bless you. If you just give us about 5 minutes, and then if we can meet with the deacons and financial committee, we're going to do that in just a couple of minutes in my office, okay?